I left Cambridge, ended up working at NASA for a couple of years as a consultant, and then dabbled in AI and used it in various different companies.
We're seeing a growth market that is projected to be in the trillions of dollars for humanoids. And so humanoids are going to be that coach with it all in there.
I think that soft skills are going to suddenly become fashionable.
Do the people that are actually contributing to GDP, do they need to pay tax? And if this is a robot, are they going to be paying taxes to government? Hey everybody, super excited to be here. It is where are we? In Zurich. We're in Zurich right now, in Switzerland, and here with Steven Waterhouse. Long-time crypto OG, really early on. Really excited to have you here and share what your new plans are and where you're going into the future. You got into crypto really early. You started as a VC, you built your own business, you're a serial entrepreneur from the UK all the way to Silicon Valley. Maybe share a bit more about your background, how you got into crypto and at the beginning, and maybe we'll cover off where you go afterwards from there.
Sure. Thanks, Stefan. And thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. Yeah, so it was back in 2013, and I'd found my way to Fortress Investment Group, a hedge fund, and when I left Cambridge in '97 after doing a PhD in AI, I said, well, I'm not going to go work for a hedge fund, which was one of my paths. I was like, I'm going to Silicon Valley, I'm going to build products. So I built many startups, sold a couple, took one public. After taking one public, started a small venture fund focusing on venture debt for IP. And then Fortress said, hey, just come build that here. And we were like, okay, that's a great idea. We'll just build that in Fortress. So in early 2013, I found myself at a hedge fund working on intellectual property. And I finally did the math, and I'm like, we're going to become a patent troll. I was like, I don't want to be a patent troll. I've been fighting patent trolls for a while. I'm going to do something else. So I turned around to Pete Brigger, and CEO of Fortress, and I said, hey, Pete, I'm going to leave. I'm going to do something else. And he said, well, just, if you got any other ideas, give me a shout. Just spend a month or so finding some new ideas and see what happens. So I talked to some friends, a good friend of mine, Sean O'Connor, who's a very OG Bitcoin guy as well, who I'd known since the dot-com days where I acquired one of his companies. We became friends over this time. And he had two ideas, and the second one was Bitcoin. And I was like, well, I read about it in Wired, but it wasn't a big deal at this point. And so I started looking at it, and in this period that I was looking at it, it shot up from, I think, like $10 to $100, and then back down to 30. And I was like, this thing's crazy. Like, what's going on? Let me understand what's going on here. So I started digging into it. And many years before that, I'd worked on distributed systems and peer-to-peer technologies. So the concept of decentralized systems was very familiar to me. The idea of let's use a decentralized architecture versus a centralized one. But of course, the innovations of Satoshi came through with using Hashcash, and then SHA-256, and this concept of proof of work was a new idea. And that fixed in my mind. I was like, oh, you can now have a currency with this thing. That totally makes sense. Decentralized systems currency. So I went back to Pete, and I was like, okay, I've got this idea to do Bitcoin. He's like, well, Bitcoin, we're already buying Bitcoin. Me and Wences and Mike Novogratz, we're all buying Bitcoin. I was like, that's great. What about if we started investing in the ecosystem around Bitcoin? Basically build venture practice around that. So a few months later, after doing that on the side and doing the IP fund and trying to figure out how I was going to do one and do the other and move on, I didn't know what to do. So I was very good friends with the IP team. Pete introduced me to a guy called Dan Moorhead. And Pete and Dan had been friends at college at Princeton. And then he's like, Dan's going to come in and run our digital currency fund. So over the summer, what was going to be the Fortress Digital Currency Fund took life, and that meant that we started buying a whole bunch of Bitcoin for the fund. We got investments lined up into Bitstamp, ultimately Circle, like a bunch of the early kind of infrastructure wallets like Zappo, custody systems. And so we started building this idea of we're going to invest in an ecosystem, and then we're going to buy the coins. And then in October, I think it was October, Silk Road happened. So the FBI seized Silk Road, and Fortress, which was probably a great idea, said, "Hey, listen, we're not gonna do this internally. You guys should do your own thing. What do you want to do?" And so Dan had a very successful macro hedge fund before this, called Pantera, And so we took the brand, took the fund structures, rolled the digital currency fund into Pantera, and that became the new Pantera. Fortress backed us along with Benchmark and Ribbit, and that was the beginning.
Amazing. When you were talking just about P2P, I mean, I remember we were working at Sun Microsystems together, where P2P was really one of the big innovations that they were trying to drive with Genie and Juxta, as well,
Yeah, that was early. The idea then was, how do you, like a lot of people are thinking now, how do you take advantage of the processing capabilities on the edges, and how do you connect those systems together? What's interesting though is that a lot of that idea, which Sun was originally thinking about it from the idea of the edge devices, the team that I started at Sun took those ideas and put it into the data center. So we said, what if we could have like fully redundant storage systems? So instead of having one big storage system, what if you have like lots of smaller storage systems that all talk to each other? And so that was the understanding that we started thinking about how to scale those things.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember, a lot of this time we came from mainframes where everybody had their own big ass data centers to then sort of more decentralized data centers where what really mattered were these facilities that would provide compute and bring the internet closer to a lot of the people. And I remember just one of the statements that really stuck to me and really is valid today. It was just really power, ping, and pipe. Right? I need the networking, that's the pipe. I need the power, I need the energy and the electricity. And then I need the pipes, right? Which is the distribution, and the power and the ping. The ping, which is the computer that constantly is doing all the networking capability.
And in some ways, the mega clusters of today in AI are kind of a throwback to, we constantly, I mean, see this in crypto too, we constantly decentralize and centralize and decentralize and centralize in different ways. I'd argue we're sort of in a very centralizing state right now and starting to decentralize in AI at least. So.
Yeah, but I mean, even you took that model, you then left Pantera and you launched Orchid, right? Which was a decentralized VPN per se, leveraging the networking capability of all the devices connecting to the internet and then trying to reward them for providing IP addresses.
Yeah, that's the basic idea. And in doing so, trying to focus a lot around the idea of removing censorship and surveillance from just people's everyday life. So in 2016, after sort of 3 years of working with Dan and Pantera, I started seeing the beginnings of this new token economy, the ERC-20s, which were just emerging. And at the same time, I'd had a kind of a niche to, I was like, I just have one more startup. I'll just do one more startup. This is famous last words, right? So I was like, I'm going to do something else now. And venture capital is something that I've alternated back and forth between, I worked with Foundation Capital in the early 2000s, just after Sun, and also Kleiner Perkins, just as an entrepreneur in residence, and then decided I wasn't ready for VC world, and then went off and did other things, then joined Pantera. With Orchid, that was a wild ride. We started sort of mid-crazy bull market in 17. We were one of the last people not to do an ICO. So we didn't do the ICO because we saw the writing on the wall. Actually, Marcus Santori was my attorney, so he developed the SAF model and saw what was happening. So we pulled out of doing the ICO, which we were thinking about doing. Subsequently did very well fundraising and then built a great team and then worked through the bear market, came out the other side into 2019, 2020 and ultimately did well through that period. Did that period.
And I think when you were launching that, you saw, I mean, ultimately we had the ethos around permissionless, censorship resistant, and all of those were sort of the core foundations. And this decentralized nature was really important in that evolution. And now sort of, after Orchid's now really established, you can actually download the app on your phone and install it. You can actually, you've sort of shifted from Orchid, you've now built a team, there's a management team in place, and now you've launched Nazaré, right, which is really AI. AI today has really centralized all the data, right? So we have really big data centers, we have big social media companies with buckets load of data, and they are building and teaching their AI engines to learn off the back of that data set. How are you now sort of viewing, with your background in crypto, decentralization, peer-to-peer, how are you sort of launching Nazaré, and what's your focus now with Nazaré in the AI space as we decentralize AI? Is that sort of a focus?
Good question, absolutely. Well, interestingly, the Orchid team is also working on decentralized AI.
Yeah.
So, we've been doing quite a bit in that area recently. Because the concept of having the node providers in the decentralized network do other things has always been something we've thought of doing and have explored. And we've explored storage, and then the AI stuff actually really started getting some traction recently. So we're working on that. It's like another one of these origin stories where it was kind of mid to late 22. And so like back in the day, I did my PhD in AI, so I didn't, we called it other things then. AI meant something else, but we were working on neural networks, machine learning for speech recognition. Exactly. And there were two projects at Cambridge University, Speech Vision Robotics Lab, which is what it's called. One was based on head Markov models, and it was the best in the world. It won all the DARPA trials. And the second one, which usually came second, was ours, which is from my supervisor, Tony Robinson. It was based on a recurrent neural network with a hidden Markov model as a language model. Language model is the key thing. Now, fast forward to where we are today, the entire systems for speech recognition are end-to-end neural networks. Some of it language models, some of it recurrent, some of it different architectures, very deep architectures. What's changed in that period of time is compute has got just massively cheaper, massively bigger, and the capability to do that. We obviously have more speech data. I'll go on to everything else. So we have more speech data, but a lot of the algorithms are very similar. So the algorithm I worked on was one called Mixtures of Experts, and that's now used as a scaling technology inside ChatGPT 4, inside Mixtral, inside a DeepSeek as a technique there. So we were doing similar things. So that meant that, and when I left Cambridge, I ended up working at NASA for a couple of years as a consultant, and then dabbled in AI and used it in various different companies, used it in the patent prediction models, but I wasn't deep into what was happening next. And I remember it was like early 22, my friend Ilya from NIR, he's like, oh, you should really check out this transformer architecture. He says, I was one of the authors of this paper. And so he was one of the authors of the transformer paper. I started looking at it, I was looking at stable diffusion, I was like, this is curious and so on. But really it wasn't until ChatGPT came along and 3.5, and I was just like, oh, what is going on? This is completely different. And up until that point, for a long period of time, I'd written off AI as being something like, this is just not that interesting right now. It's just mining people, mining human interactions, mining things for the purpose of e-commerce and advertising. And I was just not that interested in that kind of world. Ad tech wasn't interesting to me. No offense, but it just wasn't what I did. And then, and Orchid was very much started as like a foil to that as well. It was like, instead of the big data, let's cut you out of the data economy. But yeah, in 22, I just couldn't stop playing with it. I just could not leave it alone. I was talking to everybody about it. I was researching everything I could. And my feeling was like, suddenly this was useful. Suddenly this was something that was going to help people. So it was going to, I wasn't even thinking we're going to create an artificial general intelligence. It was just like, this is like human enhancing rather than human extracting, right? And then in chatting with a number of people, including my good friend Jesus Rodriguez, I was just starting to get very focused on, well, what do I do in this thing? Do I start a company? Do I start this? And I was like, hey, no more startups. So I'd been fairly successful with some angel investing and some venture investing. For that period, I moved to Europe in 2020 and started working with Fabric Ventures and also angel invested. So it was a natural thing to think, okay, well, maybe I should just invest in this space. What does that mean? What does it look like? And then I started seeing the beginnings of this crypto-influenced, this decentralized style of AI. And most of it just was a bit silly at first, and just was not that interested in what was going on. But then started seeing more interesting things and more credible people entering that area. And so that became part of the thesis that I was working on. And the thesis is fairly simple. So we talked a bit about what we were doing with Sun back in the day, right? Yeah. So the mega clusters that are built today with the Build X and Build X AI, for example, it's a $3 billion investment to build something like that. Like hundreds of thousands of these, like 30,000 H100s. And there are bigger ones being built too. And I mean, they're so big that we actually measure them in power, not even in terms of how many processors are in there. We talk about these, how many megawatts is this cluster. And this trend to centralizing things and having very, very big iron serving systems is a natural one. Yeah. It's a natural one when you don't have a lot of like algorithmic sort of exploration. Yeah. And the reason we haven't had algorithmic exploration is because this thing started working. Yeah. For a long time, these systems didn't really do very well, right? But the transformer, when they came along and they said, hang on a second, if we just add more data and add more compute and keep doing that and repeat the cycle, you don't really need to change the algorithm. Like this algorithmic exploration is like not interesting. This thing just gets better. Yeah. And they call it the scaling law. It just gets smarter and smarter and smarter. And it's like, well, why would you change anything? Yeah. Well, after a while, you're like, well, these things are just really crazy. Yeah. Forget about being centralized. They're just really expensive. Yeah. You can't go around and invest in a startup saying, hey, you want to go build a new language model? It's like, are you kidding me? Up until fairly recently, you're just like, are you kidding me? Like, what are you going to do? Like, the first check, like the Ilya who left OpenAI, he's like, his first round was $1 billion, right? I mean, that's the seed round. Yeah. Pre-seed maybe, I don't know what it was. It was crazy.
Yeah, and they say actually for data centers that if you even want to start in AI, if you don't even have 200 million, that's table stakes, right? I mean, that's really the starting capital, which is significant, right? So where is the opportunity? If it's only that big a capital investment that allows players to enter into it, where do you see the opportunity going forward?
So this is where the piece I was talking about, which is the algorithm exploration, right? So the innovation in the algorithms. If you can innovate on the algorithm to a point where you don't need the data center, you don't need that mega cluster. It's not to say it's not going to be useful. Try imagining a continuum of compute, right? Where you have, for example, we still have some mainframes kicking around, right? We still have some very centralized systems, and the guys at Sun who became Oracle still sell very big systems. But if you look at a picture of, say, the Alta Vista, which was one of the best search engines, or Excite, if you look at their data center versus what the Google data center looked like in the early 2000s, you'll notice something very interesting, which is that they had racks of these, a small number of racks of these very big, like Hewlett-Packard or Sun or SGI architectures, or DEC, the DEC Alpha. And then all of a sudden, it looked like 10,000 just 1U, 2U racks of very simple computers, basically PC architectures. And that's what the Google one ended up as. So if you imagine the same thing, it's like, what if you could take that big mega cluster and make it a cluster out of simpler chips, less powerful chips? What if you don't need to connect with InfiniBand? What if you don't need to liquid cool those things? Because this immediately saves you money. So think about it as like, what if through algorithmic innovation, I don't have to use these tightly coupled clusters architected with CUDA, which is the special language that the NVIDIA controls, and no one else has, and everybody writes to it, and so there's a big lock in there. What if you could just distribute that? And then if you want to get a little bit further and say, okay, what if you could put these clusters a little bit further away from each other? What if you could put them in different places, or different cities, and so on? And then what if the whole system was incentivized and decentralized, like we've been talking about in crypto? So imagine that continuum. So it's not to say it's decentralized AI versus centralized AI. It's a continuum of compute, and it runs all the way down to the devices. So your phone is already starting to do some things locally, and your Mac, or PC, if you configure it properly, can run language models directly. It can access data that's local to you, and I think that will continue. So you'll start to have compute that accesses data locally, some of that which just stays private to you, because why does it need to go anywhere? And then every so often it's going to need to call out to the mega cluster, or it's going to call out something local, or it's going to train a new model. Maybe it doesn't have access to the mega cluster. Maybe it runs across some incentivized system that it can pay using crypto. So this continuum of thing, and the idea with Nazaré is invest in the infrastructure that enables that kind of world, that future to be possible.
Yeah, that's. I mean, we were just talking also yesterday just how it is becoming so much more integral a part of everybody's lives, right? So AI is here, it helps us increase productivity, helps us learn more, keeps us agile, and then is a constant coach for us, right? I mean, yeah, so it's a coach there with you at any aspect that you need help on, or are looking for guidance on, or need results on, or doing research on, etc. Right? So it's like,
yeah, like take a screenshot of your calendar, upload it, ask it to research the people who you're meeting, give you speaking points, and then now it has access to, some of them have access to, a set of repositories. Goes through that, finds talking points. Your day, what should you eat today? How should you work out today? Plan. It's like our like imagination hasn't even really explored all the possibilities of these things. And I think you'll see, as we saw people in the early days like living on Bitcoin, right? You see people like living on AI, like, how can I use AI to the maximum possible potential within these worlds?
Yeah. I mean, I think, just if you look at the calendar has become a real, I looked at sort of two real things that really, I mean, search obviously one thing, calendar to manage your daily activities, and then you have maps, right? Google Maps to me is the new Explorer, because it helps you guide, or any kind of map service helps you guide your way around, find whatever you need next and close to you. And so if I combine all of that now, and I now have an agent that actually manages all of that for me, then it can actually integrate all these other data sets, my sleep data from my Oura Ring to my activity to my, and then customize your day. Okay, you're not going to train this morning based on your circadian rhythm and your sleep ratio,
Yeah, sure. Like we're doing a lot of this sort of, kind of instrumenting and observing how we are and how we behave. I have a Whoop, so a lot of people have
Whoop as well,
the different devices, and I think on a personal level, there's this possibility to just really kind of examine and change the way you live based on these pieces of data. I mean, there's some weird, almost like Black Mirror-esque ideas here in terms of like, do you become dependent on these things? Do you get, like, if you turn it all off, do you kind of know what to do?
Lost,
or is it trained you to know what to do next, right? I think that's actually a dependency of people. Some people will become somewhat dependent on these things, and some people will sort of feel enhanced and trained from these things, right? So they'll be independent eventually.
So I've been speaking to a number of robotics developers, right? So there's one really cool one here in Switzerland, River, and then there are a couple of other ones that are really doing really interesting things. And ultimately humanoids, right? We're hearing, I mean, Tesla's focusing on their humanoids, Unitree's got their humanoids, everybody's building a new humanoid. And then we're seeing a growth market that is projected to be in the trillions of dollars for humanoids. And so humanoids are going to be that coach with it all in there, but not only a coach, but also a helper. And also a productivity, a cook, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of people are really scared about that on the one hand, but on the other hand, futurists to love it, right? Because it's what we've seen in the future in all these movies. So what's going to differentiate us as people? And we were talking about it yesterday, but what do you think is really going to allow us to create new jobs, new opportunities, that people shouldn't take this as fear, but lean into this opportunity?
I'm surprised people aren't talking more about humanoids. I think it's wild that it just kind of came along and all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, of course that's happening next. It's like, hang on, what? It's trippy. And it wasn't even something that I was necessarily, it wasn't on my bucket list of things I was expecting to see soon. It was just all of a sudden that the AI got so smart and suddenly you're like, oh, hang on a second, this is a new paradigm for how to do this. It's no longer a rules-based mechanism for how you understand the world. It's actually just experience-based. And self-driving cars, they threw away the rules architecture and said, let's just build a model. And that's what Tesla's been doing now.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, the self-driving cars, you don't need any drivers anymore. The car efficiency will increase significantly. When my car's sitting idle, I'm going to give it up for open until I need it at 12 o'clock again. Things like that. I mean, it's going to be really...
As far as what the opportunities are in the future, I mean, I have one kid about to go to college and think about these things. I think there will still be a need to have specialists, have people who are, if we just take AI, like pushing the frontiers of these things, understanding computer science, being experts, being engineers, being scientists, being these things. And those people will be enhanced with AI capabilities. I don't mean that necessarily we're getting cyborg attachments yet, but maybe soon. But exactly, yeah. But they'll be able to be so much more productive and creative and explore different things. So an example of this is Crick and Watson, who worked on the DNA double helix. They were physicists that crossed over to biology. And what they were able to do was bring their understanding of atomic structures and physical chemical styles of interaction to the biological space. And that's what enabled them, once they started discovering these shapes, to quickly get to the point of understanding what the DNA was composed from. So if you imagine now we've got somebody exploring in physics, and they're using an AI that's not just trained in physics, it's trained in all. It's trained in all disciplines. And so it's able to spot some of the parallels and have intuition combined with the human intuition, who says, hang on a second, have you ever seen anything like this in this field over here? Give me everything you have in this part of math to help me understand this part of math. Can you do that? And so when you argue about what is creativity and what isn't creativity, in research, a large percentage of what is done in research is really just trying to understand where we are today and then synthesize things potentially from other fields that allow us to make a small step forwards. And then from that, we're able to then make leaps forwards. So I think the LLMs gives us that baseline where we're like, okay, we now have everything we know, and these systems are trained in very good ways. I think that soft skills are going to suddenly become fashionable. And I'm not saying everyone should just stop and study liberal arts, but I think that an understanding of philosophy, psychology, communication skills, these are going to be, and the way that humans work and interact with one another, and whether that's all the way from history, all the way through economics or sociology, these that will set people apart from one another, I believe. And also it'll set them apart from the machines, right? And I think already we're starting to have these conversations with people where he's saying, like, suddenly we're talking about these philosophical concepts of, well, is something intelligent and something not intelligent? When do we define intelligence? The Turing test itself has clearly been broken a number of times, depending on how you define it. But is it intelligent? Is it self-aware? Is it conscious? These are ideas from philosophy that we haven't had to really think through in practical terms. They've just been thought experiments. And suddenly now they may not be thought experiments.
Yeah, one of the things that I sort of think is we are, incremental innovation can happen a lot through machines, right? And they help us optimize and drive that innovation to streamline a process and optimize a process. But that leapfrog where you're thinking out of the box, you're trying to find new barriers, new opportunities, given the existing parameters, as you mentioned, I think that's a huge area which will drive a lot of new innovation into, and then ultimately, how do we utilize the tools that are available is also creating a lot of new opportunities. Which I think is we shouldn't be that worried about. I mean, I just look at sometimes, I was on a chat with somebody else, and we were talking about, as machines provide productivity, as machines take on a lot of the workload associated with generating growth, driving P&L for businesses, less people may be employed in that business as more machines take over more and more of the jobs. As they do that, the income levels of individuals are getting dispersed or diluted. And so do the people that are actually contributing to GDP, do they need to pay tax? And if this is a robot, are they going to be paying taxes to governments, right? And then if they do...
I think so. I think that will be... I mean, this goes back into the concept we were working in crypto, is like, what's the definition of sovereignty, right? So is a DAO, which doesn't have a person associated, is that a person? Is that a company? Can it be taxed? Should it be taxed? So imagine DAOs fused with agents. I think that's how it works. So and
then the agents are going to then start influencing the DAOs, and then the DAO, ultimately they're going to go to the DAO that they believe, and then ultimately the token payments for their compute resources is going to be coming from the DAOs that they appreciate most.
Or everybody or all the agents are kind of actually bound to one company, and then that company pays. I don't know, there's lots of ways to do it. But the thing I worry about, I think that we'll solve the wealth distribution problem. Either it'll get solved, or else people will solve it.
Yeah.
Imbalances in power like that don't last very long.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's solved in a nice way and peacefully.
Yeah.
But it will be solved. What I'm more worried about agency and people's sense of purpose.
Yeah.
Because in the last couple of decades, we've been very good at pacifying people.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, people just binge Netflix. Yeah. They binge this, they binge that. They're taking things. They're either drinking or they're taking pharmaceuticals to numb them to life. They're doing their job and they come back home and they're just checking in and checking out, right? Yeah. Imagine that you don't have to work anymore. Imagine there's a universal basic income or whatever you call it, like some kind of government subsidy, so that people are fine, right? There's nothing to do. You just chill, do your thing, right? Do whatever you want. Yeah. So then what, right? What do people do? And I think that my concern is not that there'll be some great uprising against the machines because people are bored. Yeah. My concern is actually that everyone just gets pacified. Yeah. And then there's a few people left who want to do things, and maybe it's hard for them to do things. I don't know, maybe it's easy for them to do things. Or maybe there's like this sort of gaps in society where people who want to create things and then people who just don't care. Yeah. That's the more dystopian world for me that I worry about, is how do we get people to stay active, to be productive to life, like kind of like move the species forwards in interesting ways, whether it's creatively or otherwise. I think that's help the rest of humanity up through this cycle.
Yeah, because
how do we take this and like help the rest of the world that doesn't even have access to GPUs?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, we all need a purpose, right? If we're not going to work, I mean, I think that's why we also we're social creatures. We like to interact with people, and ideally in groups that give us under a common purpose, right? Or common interest that allows us to interact with each other.
Yeah, you see people who retire after working many, many decades at the same job and retire and then they pass away very quickly because that's kept them alive. Yeah. That routine and that sense of purpose, whether they are consciously liking it or not, or whether it just seems like a grind to them. Yeah. The grind is the path. Like this, we're not here. I think we can argue about the U.S. Constitution, but one of the concerns one of the big problems I have with it is this concept of like the pursuit of happiness. Yeah. Because I don't think life is the pursuit of happiness. I think life is the pursuit of purpose, and I think happiness comes from having purpose. And the idea that you're just here to be happy, I think is a challenging one, especially as we enter this age of the sort of potentially post-scarcity environment.
Yeah, but I actually think it's a great opportunity, right? Because ultimately that comes back to the point that you were talking about. Philosophy really matters, right? How do I find these new opportunities? We are going to have a whole new economic shift in what we call economy. Right, GDP growth, where we're just calculating growth after growth by 3.4%. We've been doing that for hundreds of years. And it's like, at some point, that model is gone, it's broken, right? And we're breaking it right now.
Well, especially when 30% of the GDP growth goes to the government, right? It's like government spending. It's like, hang on,
it's like,
is this some circular thing here?
And so I think there's a huge, to me, there will be a whole new set of purpose and new opportunities to redefine mathematics or economics and all of these models that we've inherently been used to in the past that are no longer valid. They just, we talked about modern money theory. I don't know if you remember that. That came out really, which was a really interesting concept I mean, flawed at totally because the wrong people in charge, etc. But it was just, why do we, if we're just printing money all the time, why do we actually need to taxate people? Why do we need to, we're print more money to pay off the debt, right? So it's like, I mean, in a way, so we're going to see new models evolve, and some will then stick and some won't. Yeah. And I think the philosophy, that creativity, and then leveraging these models to simulate them.
I think the other interesting parallel that's happening, the thing that's happening right now is this kind of post-imperial situation that's happening with the US. Yeah. The emergence of China, the emergence of Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden we have the AI revolution happening simultaneously. I'm a big student of Dalio's work in terms of like looking historically over these periods of time. And history certainly rhymes, but there's a couple of wild cards in this historical rhyme right now, in this historical poem, and Bitcoin's one of them. And essentially presenting an alternative currency that could be a dominant reserve currency that's not controlled by one of the superpowers. And, well, I guess we're buying a lot, but so are they. So is everyone. But there's no central control. You can't print more of it. And then the second one is AI, which is a really non-linear kind of innovation. That I think, I sometimes like these sort of science fiction analogies. If you think like kind of like the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, where he tries to predict using mathematics how the world goes. I feel like these two innovations are so different that it's very hard to go back in time and try and say, oh, this is like the 30s, or this is like the 1820s, and so I'm just like, I don't know, like there's a lot of brand new stuff that's happening that it seems super different.
I mean, and just coming back to what you're doing, I mean, you're right in the middle of it. You're seeing all of this, opportunities in these two, I mean, I want to call them tornadoes, right? That are really shifting the economy, and they're sucking a lot of talent, a lot of resources into these two innovative, sort of mechanisms, and everything's linked to them, right? If you talk about EV, if you talk about medical, they're all linked to number one, currency, and number two, sort of AI, which is helping learn off the back of those. And I never thought of it like this. You've got two other tornadoes, right? You've got the big trade monoliths, right? Russia, China and the US. They're also got their own tornadoes with their trade relationships around the world. And then what's your thoughts around, Balaji's been working on this, and I'm just thinking of this now as we talk about decentralization, network states. Yeah. The rest of the world are they're not in the tornado, or they are not a tornado unless they contribute to an AI tornado, one of the tornadoes that we talked about. What's your view on network states? I mean, you've been a global traveler, you've lived in different countries. How do you view that?
So this concept became very popular in COVID, and also Balaji, who I've known for many years and whose work I'd followed, also gained a lot of recognition because of his predictions for COVID. The tricky part of the network state is whose aircraft carrier are you using? So
muscle.
The dollar dominance is really, there's a lot of things happening there, but a lot of it is, we can park an aircraft carrier next to you and cause a lot of trouble for you. And so if you have a network state, who's your friend? Who's looking after you? So, Singapore, which like Hong Kong, obviously, we understand, like, definitely understand who's the daddy there. Singapore, well, it's hard to say, right? And they play a very fine line between the two. And Singapore's often held up as this kind of network state example. But Singapore also has many challenges. Freshwater issues, it has to import a lot of goods, a lot of foods, and so on. So it's very, like, dependent on a lot of people. So I think some people in this network state model want to, sort of like pull the parachute cord and just escape society and escape this thing and start a new one. But they're a little bit naive in the sense of, and I'm not saying Balaji's naive, he's definitely not, but like some of the followers, they don't realize that it's the network is actually part of the title, which is that you need to be networked to everyone else. You need to figure out how you engage and play with everybody else. So I would certainly be a little concerned if I was moving to a network state in, say, Malaysia, because I'm like, okay, how stable is the Malaysian government? Who's daddy? Like, what's going on here? Like, who do I have to worry about? And this all sounds fun for like 5 years if I'm in my 20s. But if I'm putting down roots and I'm having kids and I'm like building a life, I've got to think through more long-term stable things. So I think for me, for the moment, they'll remain somewhat experiments. And I think if you look at, say, Dubai, which is clearly one of the best examples of this, and UAE in general, a lot of the people from the West are moving there in their 20s and 30s, single, no kids, like want to have a good time, don't want to pay taxes, want to make money. I'm curious to see how many of them in 5 or 10 years' time settle down and want to stay there, raise kids, do these things that is what we do next, right? And that will be the test of how some of these actual examples right now that we have today, how well they do.
How well they do. Yeah, no, it's just intrigued. I mean, I was just thinking as we're talking, Europe, right? I mean, Europe's this fragmented network of all these different states, right? And in essence, they've tried to create a centralized entity that aggregates all of that together and builds an overlay bureaucracy on top of all the. And now if they were to aggregate themselves via network states and have cryptocurrencies and then fund mercenary army or something, maybe that could be something that.
Europe's got a bunch of things right. So having a common currency is a good one. If I was in charge, I would mandate English as the common language.
Yeah, me too.
I would just say, okay, every country has to have English as one of the languages. And when you want to sell into Europe, you don't have to translate. You don't have to localize. You can sell it in English. And people talk about, like sovereignty and all these things, and there'll still be cultures, there'll still be localization, there'll still be these things. But that dominance in the US of the single language, single currency, it's crazy. I mean, you go online on Amazon in the US and the things you can get, the e-commerce stuff you can get, it's just the depth of like capabilities that you have for innovation there. A lot of it's dependent on those things.
Yeah, it's common language. And then, I mean, I was just looking the other day, I think in Europe they have 26 languages. So everything needs to get, every time they have a meeting, they have 26 translators there. Right. And why wouldn't you have HeyGen or something that auto-translates?
Sure,
that, right?
That'll happen anyway.
Yeah.
So, but in the meantime, you have most people in their 20s in major cities in the US, in UK, sorry, in Europe.
In Europe, across Europe, all speak English.
And this happened really in the last decade. Whether it's the Instagram effect, whether it's just Netflix, whatever it is, but people just get it.
Yeah, I think that to me, I think if that's one thing to get done, I would definitely agree. I think that's
controversial, but
yeah, definitely. But most people do speak English, and if you want to tap into common market, I mean, it's either Chinese or English, right? And I think I think English, we have a bit more in common with English than in Europe, at least. Anyway, fascinating. I mean, we could go on for hours.
Totally good, yeah. Of course.
We're going down a very different route to what I thought we were going to go down. But
that's always more to talk about.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Thank you.
Where can people follow you? How can they find out about Nazaré and what you're working on?
Sure.
And your ideas.
The website is just Nazaré.io, which is Nazare.io. The fund is named after the largest surfable wave in the world, which is off the coast of Portugal.
There's that big cliff area there, a huge wave.
So there are people have found bigger waves, but no one surfed them. So this is the place where the largest waves in the world are surfed. And we're on Twitter, Nazaré VC. I'm fairly easy to find if you search for me. Steven Waterhouse, crypto or Orchid or AI. And we're looking for people innovating in this area globally. We invest across the world. And
give me one or two of the investments that you're most excited about.
Yeah, sure. So we recently invested in Ahmad's new company. Ahmad started Stability AI. His new company is called Intelligent Internet.
Okay.
And so this is building essentially a fully decentralized AI architecture. With the initial proof of work actually based on Bitcoin, but eventually they're going to move to a proof of useful compute. And his idea is try to democratize AI for everybody across the world. So that's the most sort of decentralized thing we've done in the investment space. We've done investments in zero knowledge technology, homomorphic encryption, and then on the more kind of enterprise SaaS area, we invest in crypto systems and non-crypto systems.
Yep.
So we invested in Vast, which is one of the largest GPU clouds based in Los Angeles. Instead of using mega clusters, they offer the ability for people to rent their GPU setups, whether that's a cluster or whether that's a machine at home, into their system, and then people can search and index based on the capabilities of the system and then deploy jobs on them.
Nice. Yeah? An intelligent internet, it's called.
Intelligent Internet is a Mars company, and then Vast.ai is the...
Vast, V-A-S?
V-A-S-T.
V-A-S.
.ai.
I've heard of them. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for your time. And
of course.
Yeah, look forward to following up and finding out more as the journey evolves.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.